It's a job like no other.
Whoa.
Where a day at the office takes on a whole new meaning.
The things I do to make a living amaze me sometimes.
First bath in 3 weeks.
These shooters are the best in the business.
Yes.
And expectations are high.
There's not a chance of light.
Come on, this way, this way.
I'm Chris Johns, editor of National Geographic magazine. Please join me as we count down the 10 very best photographs of 2011. When the first issue of National Geographic magazine was published, photography was not part of the equation. It was a serious scientific journal. That changed.
I was kidnapped in Iraq in 2004.
The rule of gun prevails in Kivu.
Right now I'm failing. I'm failing miserably.
The burner doesn't drop well, you and I are dead. Yeah.
Photography is part of our core, it's part of our DNA.
You are embraced in darkness.
It's the thrill of making pictures.
There was no horizon to be seen.
It's the adrenaline rush you get from doing things that have never been done before.
Très bien. This is so good.
Karen, what else do I have before lunch? The challenge of selecting the 10 best photos is first a challenge of volume. There are so many photographs taken. It could be 150,000 pictures taken on one assignment. We do 70 to 80 assignments a year. To get it to 100 is relatively easy. To get it from 100 to 20 is much more difficult.
It's gonna be a tough call in the end there.
Yeah, it is. To get it from 20 to 10 is extremely difficult, and it becomes very much a personal decision. Karsten Peter absolutely thrives on adventure. He gives us story proposals that I find mind-boggling.
Tornado warning. I have a large tornado. It's a quarter mile off my bumper. Holy cow.
All you have to do is meet Karsten and realize that he really, at heart, is a pretty crazy guy. On this assignment, Karsten descends into what might be the world's largest cave. It's in Vietnam.
National Geographic was alerted by a discovery done by a British caving team in 2009. So that was for me a great opportunity to explore and photograph this cave. Something never done before. The cave is located in the biggest limestone area in Asia, and it's quite remote. It's a very rugged countryside, and you have to walk for days to get into the interesting parts. First of all, you have to get yourself through the jungle. You spend up to 2 weeks in the darkness of the cave. You're facing leeches and insects. If you are not enthusiastic with caves, you wouldn't bear it.
It's 4 kilometers long and at one point 180 meters high.
So I was climbing around in the cave. I found this incredible balcony, and I saw this incredible flowstone. So I tried to climb up to that balcony, and I realized how overwhelming this perspective was. I mean, you had this incredible deep view into this huge room just in front of this incredible flowstone. And I just envisioned what kind of image I want to take. On the last day, the group decided, okay, we finish. They want to quit the trip, they want to go out. I mean, I had this vision and I needed this image. Yeah? It was so important to me. I knew the challenge to light it would be quite tricky. And it was morning, it was cold, they had to get it in neoprene. It is a nasty job, and just for help of photograph. So I had to position the strobes and try to anchor them in the wall and trigger them remotely. And then at the right time, swimmers had to fire the underwater flash bulbs. So it was quite a coordination to do, and all the strobes had to function properly, and that took a while until that was really perfect.
Karsten's cave photograph is a composition classic. It has depth, layers, a strong foreground with stalactites, a background with a diver on the left, a diver on the right. Adding to that composition is strong color. This is an extraordinary composition. The photographer for the Teenage Brain story, Kitra Kahana, was a summer intern for us a few years ago. It was immediately apparent she was a highly talented photographer.
I applied for the internship at National Geographic and ended up getting it, and was there for the summer of 2009.
What we decided to do was take a young photographer like Kitra and basically turn her loose in Austin, Texas with a group of teenagers and see what kind of photograph she came up with.
I was sent to be immersed. So I started off first day of school, kind of making friends the way a new student sort of would. I attended classes, I went to slumber parties, I photographed the weekly football games, really every aspect of teenage life. I graduated high school when I was 16, and I was 22 on the assignment, so I was a little bit older than the students there, but not by a lot. I was at a bus stop with two high school students. They were kind of looking at each other, making eye contact, not really sure whether they wanted to tell me something. I could tell something was going on. And then you could see that they decided to let me in. And so I said, well, you know, we attend this weekly secret meeting. Well, what's the meeting? And they said, it's a fight club. And initially, you know, my radar went off, like, oh, a fight club? So there was about 9 students gathered in his backyard. 2 would go up against each other, and I just kind of danced around them, taking pictures. And they were all videotaping with their phones.
I love the composure of the picture because you've got the 2 boys wrestling down in the lower part of the frame. It's bounced nicely by the other 2 boys who are very clearly documenting their wrestling with sort of a detached, almost disinterested manner. The other thing I like about the composition is it's slightly off kilter. It's just a little bit off. And that, of course, is emblematic of teenage life. You're just a little bit out of kilter and a little bit off. Pascal Maitre has an ability that is absolutely remarkable. He has the know-how, the courage, and the commitment to tell these stories and to put himself in harm's way, but thankfully has always come back with extraordinary images that just shock you.
J'ai beaucoup travaillé sur l'Afrique. I believe I have worked in 47 countries in Africa. That I have been in Africa probably about 150 times in the past 30 years. This is without doubt one of the most somber places in Africa. There have been between 3 and 4 million deaths since 1994 in this area. There is oil, there is gold, there are rare minerals, but the people have almost nothing. Everything goes to warmongers or surrounding country that come to take the resource out of this area. the rule of gun prevails in Kivu, a dangerous province in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This was in the morning, very early, and it was a training that is called Shakaham Haka, to train for war. They are very young, and so there are always a peculiarity with the Mai Mai. They have a tradition of taking magic potions that are made by their witch doctor, their sorcerer. This magic potion is made with herb and meat from sacrificed animals. The ones who are in charge of the magic potion are the youngest, who are 13 or 14 years old. Because they tell us that these kids who have not had any sexual relation have a much stronger power for magic potion. So the job of giving out this magic potion is given to these children. When they go to war, they sing, they chant. I was running with the people because in order to take this picture, I have to follow them. I also use a bit of flash to stop the movement. This magic potion was either it is in water, or they will eat it, or it will be put into their body through incision. Is to protect them against bullets, to become a kind of Superman. The bullet will not touch them. But of course, they get killed anyway.
The slight blur to the picture, the expression on the face, everything in this picture works. There's a haunting element to Erica's photographs of the Sami people. They bring us into a life that most of us will never see, will never experience.
In my experience, a photograph has never been taken, it's only given. I'm currently living in the Arctic region of Scandinavia. I've been in Norway the better part of 2 years. I came here because I was interested to explore the Sami reindeer herding culture, to understand sort of how an ancient culture has continued functioning in a modern society. My story on Sami reindeer herders is the first published story I've had in National Geographic. For the past 10 years, I've been exploring people and cultures related to the natural world and their connection to the cycles of life and death. And I wanted to come and live with the Sami to see how an entire society that had deep, deep traditions and roots connected to the natural world was functioning today. In order to create the film and the photographs, I had to sort of become a working part of this family. So I've worked as a housekeeper for the past 2 years, which allowed me to really gain a deep understanding of what happens in a daily life. They follow the seasons, they follow the herd, and this predicates how the life is lived. And when I'm here, I feel that time as I've understood it for the majority of my life doesn't exist anymore. This photo was taken in the February month. I think it was maybe minus 30 Celsius. It was a really cold day. And that day, it was completely hazed over, so there was no horizon to be seen. It was a very flat light for me. We were on a scooter for most of the time, and we sort of stopped the scooter and sort of walked because we saw something in the distance. And as we got closer, we realized it was 2 reindeer carcasses that had been stuck together. I had never seen something like that before. It was really stark. And I asked to Sven, who was the herder, what is this? What has happened? He goes, these are 2 female reindeers, and they had been fighting, and their horns locked together when they're fighting, and they couldn't get them apart. They clearly had starved because they were stuck together. And he was really quiet when he was explaining this to me. The first thing I wanted to do was make a photograph that showed that the horns were stuck together. I was using a 4x5 field camera. It's a much slower camera, and I feel it's a lot more meditative, the process of working. Each piece of film is hand-loaded. That's why on this day there's only 5 images taken. Herders mark the ears of the reindeer to show the ownership. So he went to see whose reindeer they were. And one was his, and one was his cousin. His next intuition was he wanted to get them apart. He wanted to take the horn apart. I still don't exactly understand that today, why. Then when he had finally gotten the horns apart, I wasn't really sure what he was going to do. And then he just kind of stood there for a minute. And that's when I made the picture. In this moment, it explained everything to me. He was standing there with his reindeer in his landscape, this Arctic landscape that he's known his entire life. And in this moment, I think to myself, this man has seen life and death on the tundra for many years, and still he was contemplative.
This photograph works together in a quiet, reflective way, which is absolutely true to the Sami people. Spirit bears are not polar bears. They're black bears with a recessive gene that in fact makes them white. They're elusive. Paul Nicklin knew it would be a challenge. He has a track record at National Geographic magazine that is the envy of virtually every photographer who works for us. When he brings a story idea to us, it's just simply, yes, Paul.
I'd say this one can go in.
I had more equipment than I've ever had on an assignment. I had over 2 tons of camera equipment. And I had 15 camera remotes. I had underwater camera gear. I had scuba gear to do the salmon in the streams. I had other remotes and pocket wizards and all my big lenses.
What are you looking for, Paul? What's that? What are you looking for? I'm looking for a bear that is apparently white. We've yet to see one after 2 weeks of searching. Not getting discouraged, we know they're here.
Technology's been very kind to natural history photographers, especially in the use of camera traps. First off, you put the camera in a location where there's high traffic. You want to play the odds. And more often than not, over time, with patience, you'll have a winner.
The key ingredient to this assignment was patience. So for 3 weeks, we sat for 16 hours a day in the pouring rain, cold, wet, miserable, damaging equipment without even seeing a bear. What goes through my mind while I'm sitting there waiting for bears all day? I thought about what I was going to do in my next career. National Geographic's not going to keep hiring a photographer who proposes these big grandiose stories with these big ideas of this rare white bear and not delivering. I had been on this assignment for 6 weeks, and I waited for weeks before this bear came out of the forest one day. He went up into the moss-covered forest and he sat down to eat the fish. Very slowly, quietly, worked myself towards the bear. I kept my body language very quiet, very gentle, and I slowly moved in a very sort of humble fashion, introduced myself to the bear. I was so engrossed in the moment, I was looking at the scene through my lens, so everything seems wider than it is. And when I looked up over the camera and I realized I'm 3 feet from this bear, the only word that I can come up with to describe a moment like that was humbling. It was a very humbling moment to have had a bear tolerate me to the point that it let me into his world.
Paul is a master at getting closer. I feel like I'm there. I can almost smell that forest, the bear, and I completely connect with, just as Paul has connected with both a spirit bear and a landscape that is an integral part of who he is. At the end of the day, you're experienced enough to know that you will have terrible days in the field.
For this assignment, I only had 3 good shooting days. Without patience, I could not have survived this story.
You will have terrible months in the field.
Probably I have a different comfort zone than other people. The weirder it gets, the more I like it.
In order for you to really understand the story, you'll have to break down most aspects of what you thought you understood when you first got there.
There's always this push that happens where you're pushing for the best image possible. And you have 20 minutes or whatever it is to make something great out of that moment.
If you hang in there, you keep trying, you keep learning, you will be rewarded. And National Geographic magazine will give you the time to do just that.
The process of a typical story can last a year and a half, 2 years, maybe even longer. I manage a staff of around 30 people in the photography department, and I also assign photographers to each of the stories that appear in the magazine.
The other one, this one, to me, it's a little hard to, yeah, it's a signature picture. I mean,
A typical day is never a typical day. It can involve a lot of meetings, of course, deciding how to cover a story or reviewing proposals, working with picture editors to try to figure out best way to do a story. I'm also have to work with all the budgets. Always begins with the proposal.
Let's hear it for River Otters.
So Charlie brought us this story, and
Once the story is approved, I assign it to a picture editor, and they'll begin to research the story and the topic to figure out just what the story is.
compelling set of pictures that tell the story.
Once they get a handle on the story, we assign a photographer, And then they get together with the story team, with the writer and the researchers and the maps director and the graphics editor, and they come up with a game plan and they pitch that to the editors of the magazine. Once that's approved, we know, well, it's going to be a 24-page story with a 4,000-word essay, and we're going to schedule it for January of 2013.
Very good.
Then you begin to do your work. You get the photographer in the field. They'll shoot for 4 weeks, come back in, edit, go back out, come back in, edit again.
You'll have to tell me what your favorites are so we know what we're going to lead with.
Do not worry, she knows.
And then they'll produce their final tray. And once that final tray is okayed by the editor, it'll go to the layout department with our design editors.
Thoughts or comments about ways we can improve it? Or?
This is also just a sketch. It'll get a lot better than this.
When Nick Nichols comes to me with an idea, I listen. He will take those classic subjects we've dealt with for more than 100 years, and he will put a spin on them and a power to them unlike any coverage of that story in the past. Nick is one of the best natural history photographers who's ever picked up a camera. Nick Nichols has covered more than 25 stories for National Geographic magazine. This story takes him to Kenya, just outside Nairobi, to an elephant orphanage. Here, we find that human beings have an incredibly close relationship with orphan elephants. They come to think of those orphan elephants as their own children, and the orphan elephants come to think of their keepers as their mothers.
Orphan elephants was a last chapter in 20 years of working with elephants. And I chose specifically orphan elephants because I wanted to make people care about elephants in another way, a very emotional way. They're going to go this way for the afternoon? Oh, more, okay. Elephant orphan story is important to me because of having so much time I've spent with elephants, and now they're being killed so aggressively because of ivory. It's very important to tell the world about elephants in a way that they care enough to try to help stop this killing. And so a baby elephant is the ultimate way to get people to get it. When I chose to do orphan elephants, I was intentionally after pure emotion. Shukuru is one of the favorites of all the keepers because she's so sweet. She was tiny, tiny, tiny when she was rescued. She's sunburned and was very, very fragile. Probably 1 out of every 10 is all that lives. But Shukuru is going to make it. You know if they get through that teething phase and they get through the loss of mom, they're going to make it. That particular day, it was in the rainy season. So every time it rains, they have to get a blanket on the baby. And all day long, we had been off and on. And these guys were really getting frustrated because the sun would come out and they would take it off. Then it would rain again and they would put it back on. The men are discussing, wow, man, how many times are we going to have to do this today? They're very susceptible to getting sick because in the wild, their mother stands over them when it's raining. She does the same thing for sunshine. She stands over it because her skin is very delicate. And I was constantly looking for, is there a human in the picture that's taking care of the orphan? I wasn't looking for pictures of orphans by themselves or humans by themselves. I wanted every picture to be that, look at these African men taking such care of a baby elephant. What I want the audience to do is to feel that these creatures are something very, very special.
What I find so special about this photograph is the elephant's expression. This picture means so much to me because it eloquently addresses this powerful connection between the men who have devoted their lives to caring for these elephants and this vulnerable animal that has this strong bond with those men. Vince is a very accomplished sports photographer. And what a sports photographer does is use light, use composition. But most importantly, a sports photographer uses moment.
I don't even have a pet. I don't have a dog. We don't have plants. The notion that I would be able to photograph animals was completely hysterical to me. It's been an interesting journey, and I've been doing it for a while now, but I have no idea what I'm doing, to be honest with you. My name's Vince Musi, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I'm a photographer for National Geographic magazine. This assignment was about the domestication of animals, probably the single most important event in modern human history. Neolithic man domesticates animals for the first time. How that happens, we don't really know. What were the criteria? Was it tameness? Was it for coat color, for size? All of these variables, no one really has known. And there are a great many things that happened over a period of time with domestication. We know now that old dogs came from wolves, and yet we have this incredible diversity in the way that dogs look. So how did that happen? And that's what we set out to find. We photographed all over the world for this assignment. Cows on mattresses in Norway, wild foxes in Siberia, went to Kazakhstan to photograph horses, quite a number of places in the US as well. Part of this experiment goes into rats. This photograph's made in a place called Akadem Gorak near Novosibirsk in Siberia in Russia. What they're trying to find out is what happens at the genetic level when you select for tameness and domesticate an animal. So rats have been domesticated for thousands of years. But what happens when you domesticate rats for two specific criteria, tameness and aggressiveness? We had photographed these very docile, tame rats, and they were wonderful, and you could pet them, and they were very nice. And then we got to the aggressive rats, which are jokingly called heavily weaponized rats. They put two cages together, they let them transfer from one cage to the other. When we first started, they got loose. And these rats, on a civilian population of rats, can be very, very dangerous because they are completely nuts. We're bringing 15 cases of equipment in, and the head researcher is shaking her head and saying, "This is very, very bad. This is never going to work." It's really difficult to photograph an animal that's aggressive, particularly when it's isolated. It's not aggressive towards anything but meat. So we're photographing these rats in this cage. They're not going anywhere, and they're not too happy about this. So they are flying around the cage. It's like doing ballet. It brings me back to my roots as a sports photographer. They'll often bite each other, and they're really upset. And so I'm just photographing it as best I can. It's a small little target and through a tiny piece of glass. But there were a couple of these guys that were pretty aggressive to me, and I interact with them as best I can. I'm doing my best Robert De Niro with the rats and saying, "Are you talking to me?" And of course they're flying around the cage and they're scowling at me, and this one bad boy emerged from the heap there and stood up, challenged me back, and that's the photograph we made. It's a very simple photograph made with one light and one camera.
Vince captured some amazing moments with these rats. But there's one moment in particular where the rat's rearing back. It looks like a prison cell with a bunch of mad prisoners ready to lash out at each other, which is basically what these rats are doing. And that's what sets the picture far above the other pictures. The whole frame, the way it moves from not just the aggressive rat, but how the other rats are reacting to him, is a moment that is absolutely unforgettable.
Collaboration is key when it comes to laying out a story at National Geographic. Our department is basically the funnel that all the material comes through to get onto the pages of the magazine. We work with the picture editors, work with the photographers, work with the text editors. The graphics editors are in this department, and basically find a way to develop a narrative with all these disparate pieces of material and make it into a story that makes sense.
Once the layout is completed and we start to work on the color, when you initially look at an image that a photographer has shot, the file that's given to us is in raw format. You have to take that raw format and it's minimally processed. So there's some things that you have to do to bring it to the color and the saturation and the contrast and shape that you want to end up with in the magazine. When you're looking at the monitor and when you're looking at a piece of paper, they're two different things. We have to use our skills to try to trick the eye a little bit and bring out those contrast values. And we'll oversee the printing of the magazine and work with the printer to make sure that we optimize everything there so it works best with what we give them for a good final product.
The photographers have worked hard to make these photographs, so the last step is taken with great care. This month, 45 million people will read the magazine. We look over everything with the intensity that our photographers used when they were looking through the camera to capture the images.
The yellow border of the magazine is actually a trademarked color. I think that's what we're known by, is that yellow border. It's mixed specifically for National Geographic magazine. When you're out on the printing press and you're printing, say, the cover of the magazine, there's a separate printing plate that's putting down that color on the page.
Oh, Lindsay Adario is a photographer with incredible talent to see. She is passionate, she's committed, and she is extraordinarily courageous. And will go into places that are volatile, but she doesn't go in foolishly. She goes in carefully, calculates the risks, but she has this strong desire to tell the truth. Lindsay lives in New Delhi, India. Her assignments have taken her to some of the most dangerous corners of the world.
I spent 2 years in Baghdad in 2003, 2004, documenting the war and the fall of Saddam and what happened after the fall of Saddam. Actually, I was kidnapped in Iraq in 2004, right outside of Fallujah. So that was one of the reasons why I stopped going back, because my family asked me to pull out of Iraq. I was assigned to go back to Baghdad for the first time after American troops pulled out, and to basically show what's happened to Baghdad since the end of the war in Iraq and how Iraqis are picking up with their lives and moving on. I was a bit tentative because I wasn't sure. I hadn't been back in so many years. I really didn't know how to operate there anymore. I didn't know how dangerous it was. I was scared. When I went back, I immediately fell back in love with the Iraqi people and really had a wonderful time and discovered the place all over again, which was really interesting. People are out and about. It's not fully recovered by all means. The infrastructure is completely broken. But at the same time, people are tired of war and they're tired of death and fighting. And you can sense that. You can sense that they're looking forward. They're looking to the future. The images that we've seen over the last 8 years have been death, destruction, bombing, IEDs, things that we see repeatedly. And so when I went in there, I really wanted to show something positive and fun. And Iraqis are funny and they have a great sense of humor, and I wanted to try and get that across. The photo was taken at a 4D movie theater in Baghdad. Not only do you have glasses and you see the film in 3D, but you also, the audience also had water spraying on them and gusts of wind, and so it's a full experience. I had an image in my head of a theater full of people wearing these glasses, and it was so dark I could barely photograph. Even with the light of the movie, I could barely take photos, and my exposure was incredibly long. I had to go back several times before I got the image that I wanted. I wanted to show that sense of happiness and sort of people just losing themselves in the moment in a place that had suffered so much.
So not only did Lindsay gain access to, I think what most of us would agree is an unknown part of Baghdad, she does it with such flair. The blue light, the projector in the background, the balance between the light on the people's faces, their expressions, those crazy-looking 3D glasses. But you can also see this is a temporary structure. It looks like a tent-like structure. All of it comes together to make it a top 10 photograph.
I covered war, I covered the invasion of Iraq, suicide bombings, military operations, but without a doubt, the child marriage project is the hardest thing I've ever covered, like from my soul. I was doing a story on girls who had set themselves on fire. They essentially had self-immolated as a suicide attempt. And it was the first time I had ever encountered any sort of drastic action like this. Anytime I had heard of anyone setting themselves on fire, it was always in some sort of political arena, and very rarely. As a journalist, I felt the responsibility of looking at why this was happening, not just the actual act itself. I was talking to the doctors and trying to find out why this had happened, and they gave a lot of really mundane answers. Like one 15-year-old girl had broken her husband's television set and set herself on fire. Another girl had got in a fight with a family member about not making the tea hot enough, so she set herself on fire. And it was clearly like a mental disconnect between the thing that sparked it and this drastic action. It turned out that most of the girls were married underage, prepubescent ages, at 9, 10, 11. It kind of clicked what might happen to a girl who's forced into adulthood in every sense of the word at such a young age. Seeing these children, particularly the girls who were prepubescent, and know that they were going to have their marriages consummated was really, 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 really difficult. As I continued researching the topic, I realized that it was an issue in many countries around the world, more than 50 countries actually. It became clear to me that it was much bigger than I anticipated. This was not specific to Afghanistan, and it was not specific to any religion or culture. It was something that needed to be addressed globally. The photograph that was selected for the top 10 was taken in the Herat hospital in the burn center there. It was in late afternoon. There were several girls who had set themselves on fire. In the afternoon is when they're kind of resting after being cleaned. And so that's what this photograph is from. There's gauze over her face to protect from flies because her skin is still very sensitive and raw. While you can't see the girl's face in this particular image, you do understand that this is a girl who has gone through something traumatic.
This picture has a softness, the light, the gauze over her face almost portrays a dreaminess. Yet beneath that soft gauze is an incredibly hard life. This is my #1 pick out of the top 10 photos of 2011. There have been a lot of pictures made of lions, but this photograph by Joel Sartori is absolutely gorgeous. Yet underneath all of that beauty is a message. And the message is, lions are in trouble.
You know, when I started, I never thought that I would actually photograph a species that was going to go extinct. But now, I've done it so much, it's really depressing.
Joel Sartori spent weeks in the Albertine Rift, one of the most violent and dangerous places in the world. Here we see rich biodiversity, wildlife, in collision with human beings.
The Albertine Rift is a large volcanic valley in western Uganda. I was sent there to document the wildlife and the people encroaching on the wildlife as Uganda's population grows. You see a lot of great things when you're in Africa. Life is different there. It's very exhilarating, very exciting, very freeing. Parts of it are grinding poverty, and other parts of it are the wild as it's always been. Flew for 10 days straight, I think, doing aerials right off the bat, because that's the best way to get a sense of the geographic features. There was a German veterinarian there named Dr. Lou Seifert, and he has been this lone ranger out there in Queen Elizabeth National Park for many years, documenting the decline, basically, of predators, lions, hyenas especially. And he wrote this really compelling email saying, hey, if you come here, I can show you what's happening. I can show you the wildlife, and he knew where all the lions were. One afternoon, he finds a signal of one of these big male lions. He says, they're up in the tree. Well, the tree is like 10 miles away on a mountaintop or something. So we drive over there, and it's late afternoon. And sure enough, here's these two big male lions passed out cold, sleeping in this giant tree, huge, enormous tree. I just said, when will they wake up and move and do something? He says, well, probably about dusk, they'll get going again. And I just said, why don't we wait? I was standing up on the top of a Land Rover, as high up as I could be on my tiptoes to try to get more eye level with this critter. The other thing is you gotta worry about being eaten, you know? Now, lions don't attack people very often at all, but they're big, and you worry, you get a little nervous. Eventually, right when the light dipped low enough for me to use this floodlight that I brought from home. It's like a $15, 4 million candle power floodlight that works off the cigarette lighter in the vehicle. A female lion started calling in the distance, and these males both perked up. One was on one side of the tree, one was on the other. I couldn't see one of them, but the one that was way out on a limb that you see in the photograph, he stretched, he yawned. Lou hit him with the spotlight. I thought that was great, you know, because the spotlight balanced out with the light in the sky. Eventually he stood up, and he just stood there for long enough to get several pictures. 15 seconds, that's plenty of time. And that was it. And then he walked down the limb of the tree, and he walked down the trunk of the tree, and he jumped into the grass, and he disappeared. It was just this perfect little scene.
Well, my first reaction when I saw this photo was, this is just magnificent. The moment with the lion, that cobalt blue, the lion with a curious look on his face. There's another photograph Joel took that's an extraordinary photograph as well. The lion turns his head and yawns. It's a wonderful moment. But there's something about that lion staring eye to eye with us that has an immediacy and a poignancy that is just riveting. This picture comes together in a powerful way that I just was simply blown away. And believe me, I have seen a lot of lion pictures, and this is one of the best.
Photography plays a vital role in preserving endangered species in a couple of ways. In one way, we can let the public know that this animal or this plant is in serious trouble. That's huge. I mean, nobody's going to fall in love with something if they've never even met it. And you're only going to save the stuff you love and cherish, really.
We have some of the most accomplished, talented storytellers in the world working for National Geographic magazine. National Geographic photographers are incredibly curious. They're problem solvers. They're never satisfied. They're persistent. And they love to be out there embracing the world and giving voices to the people, the animals, and the landscapes they meet. I'm Chris Johns. Those are my picks for the 10 best photographs of 2011.